This episode is brought to you by Indie Film Hustle TV, the world's first streaming service dedicated to filmmakers, screenwriters, and content creators. Learn more at indiefilmhustle.tv. I'd like to welcome to the show Guy Pigden, man. How you doing, Guy?
I'm great. Thank you for having me, Alex. Great pleasure to be here.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much for coming on the show. We've been trying to do this for a while now, so I appreciate your patience. It's been very busy at the podcast the last 6
You're busy,
to 8
man. You've
months.
got a couple of. I was planning to do like a joke on Twitter or something where it's like, what does Oliver Stone, Richard Linklater, and Guy Pigden have in common? They're on the the
Indie Film Hustle podcast.
Exactly.
Exactly. So I could say the exact same joke. Like, what do these guys have in common? Yeah, we're just all on the same podcast. That's it. That's where it all ends. The comparisons. But thank you so much for your patience, brother. You reached out to me a while ago, talking to me about first of all, one of my favorite topics, which is unfortunately one of my favorite topics, a horrible distribution situation, which we're going to get into, and also a 7-year independent film, which I always love to get into the details of why it takes 7 years to make an independent film, and all of that stuff. But you've been following me for a while. You've been listening to the podcast and stuff. When did you start listening? And then you also, the books had an impact on your career. Tell me a little bit about how you just found me.
Well, that's right. So I was coming from a space. I was sort of finishing up my second feature film, and I'd had my first feature film, which is called I Survived the Zombie Holocaust, which came out in sort of 2015. And it came out around 2015, and it while had a great festival run and got some great reviews, it did not financially do very well for me for a number of reasons, which you sort of documented in your podcast. But I was sort of wondering, I was like, is this just the experience of all low-budget indie filmmakers? Is this what we all go through, or is it just me? Am I missing something? Am I missing some key piece of information about how, because this business seems broken to me, that like all of it seemed quite broken in a lot of ways, in how these films were distributed, how these deals were done, and also sort of the cost of making a film versus how much it's actually likely to make back, all of that stuff. And I was asking other filmmakers, and no one seemed to have a good answer. And then I came across your podcast where you sort of really broke down the steps as an indie filmmaker. You sort of broke down how these deals can screw you over. You sort of broke down your own journey with what you were working on with, on the corner of Ego and Desire and This Is Meg and all that sort of thing. But you really sort of, I guess, put into context and framed everything that I'd been thinking about, that I need to make my filmmaking more of a business. I need to stop thinking like it's just an art form and that I'll just be discovered. We all have to throw away that lottery ticket mentality. All of those things have to, like, you just need a whole shift in perspective, really. If you want to be like, because we can't all be Spielberg, even though we start off imagining that we will be. So how can we have a sustainable career and without maybe those heady heights, but still get to make our films? And so everything that you were talking about just struck this huge chord with me, because it made me sort of really understand, okay, so I'm not crazy, and actually there's this world out there that I need to understand more, and I need to sort of develop these skills, the stuff that you sort of try to educate people on. I need to employ all of that stuff in my filmmaking if I want to continue to grow and develop. And so I was sort of following yours, and also what I found is a lot of the principles of my second feature film, the way I made that is in micro budget and all that sort of thing. Apart from the 7 years, I failed in the quick turnaround, which is again one of your sort of things. Turn it around quickly. I did not do that. But apart from that, a lot of the principles were, I had in mind a lot of these ideas that you actually put into words either in your book or on your podcast, and so that's how I sort of came across you. and have been a sort of loyal follower and subscriber ever since. And what a fantastic thing that you have provided for filmmakers like myself, to sort of better understand how we can equip ourselves in this film industry, which does punch you in the face.
And then some
all the time. As you mentioned, what are you going to do? You're going to keep getting you're going to flinch, or you're going to learn to get your guard up just a little bit to protect yourself, right? As opposed to just walking straight into those punches.
Constantly punches. Yeah. No, and I don't care what you are, you're going to get hit. You're always going to get hit all throughout your career. Hit. Yeah.
Yeah. So those were all things that, really, sort of resonated with me. And that's why I sort of have been listening and reached out. And now my film is out. I thought it would be a great opportunity, hopefully to talk about some of my experiences and how they relate to all of these things that you're, trying to educate people about.
I appreciate that, man. Thank you. Thank you so much for the kind words. It is, like I've said many times before on the show, sometimes you just don't know what impact you'll have when you do an episode, or it's just me with a mic in a room with a Yoda behind me, somewhere in Los Angeles, and you just put it out there, and hopefully but look, you're coming from us. Where are you calling from, sir?
New Zealand. Yeah, New Zealand.
Exactly. If you couldn't tell by the accent, New Zealand. It was New Zealand or Australia, but God forbid, you.
Yeah,
I know
exactly.
you can't do that. Never. No, don't do that. Don't do that. It's like calling all Latinos Mexicans, and I'm Latino, so I can say that joke. It just depends on where you are in the country of the U.S. If you're in New York, you're Puerto Rican. If you're in Miami, you're Cuban, and if you're in L.A., you're Mexican. But it doesn't matter. But thank you for that. I'm glad what I do has helped you a lot, and that's also wanted to kind of dig deeper into what happened with your first film. So before we do that, though, how did you even get started? Why did you choose this painful, ridiculous path that we call filmmaking?
I love how you call it a virus, like a sickness, and sometimes you get better and you feel like you've sort of semi-recovered, but no, it always
comes back and gets you, man.
It always come back, and that's almost what it's sort of been like for me. So I sort of got into the business. I started off, lived in London for a couple of years, and I worked as a runner at a production house there. And that was my sort of like break into the industry. I'd already had that sort of that indie filmmaker spirit prior to that. So when I was 16, I made my first short film. I bought like a high 8mm camcorder to shoot it on. I cut it on 2 VCRs, all that sort of thing. And, so that's where I started the idea that I wanted to make films. And I really wanted to make films and tell stories because I have come from my background. My parents, would read stories to me, and my dad is a huge movie fan, and he would sort of talk to me about also how movies were made and directors, not just, hey, check out this film. And so that certainly sparked my interest in sort of filmmaking. I started to do it, and I did this short film when I was 16. And that, again, as soon as we'd shot that, even though it was obviously still quite a painful process even back then, I was like, oh man, I have to do this. And so I went to London and I got a job as a runner. And then as a runner, I also started being a script reader for that same production house there. And I started reading a lot of scripts. And again, I had quite a strong background. The only thing I did well in school at was writing, creative writing. And so I really started as a writer who wanted to be a director. So I read all these scripts and I thought, look, these are coming from agents. These are coming, and I think I can do as well as most of these scripts of the, sort of, I don't know, a couple of hundred scripts I read. I only ever recommended like 3. So I just sort of thought I could get to this level. And so I started writing my own scripts and developing my own scripts. And some of those, even as a very young, a young writer at like 2021, did sort of get some. I think I got one of them to Columbia TriStar in the UK, and it got very favorable coverage. And they're like, look, this is really good. We're not going to make it, but here's a bunch of agents and maybe you can get representation through the script. And I didn't get representation because I didn't have any follow-up scripts. They were like, hey, this is good, this is promising, but what else have you done? And I was sort of like, well, nothing really. And I didn't have that foresight and that sort of thing to just start writing like crazy and just go, here's 5 others, and really get the ball rolling then. But it did sort of, again, give me some confidence that, hey, I can write and I'm a good writer, and hopefully I can transition to being a writer and a director. And so I came back to New Zealand. I started making stuff again, just making stuff with my friends. A lot of those friends that I still work with to this day. Started shooting stuff with a slightly, I guess, more of an education in film. I've never been to film school or anything like that, but I had a better knowledge and a better understanding of kind of the business and the way things worked a little bit more, and obviously story and structure and all those things from being a script reader. And I started to get actual paid work as a writer. So I developed a few different things that sort of didn't get produced, but, sort of took me in again. It's like, okay, I'm getting paid for writing now. So I know that I must be doing something right, and I must be on a certain level if, this can happen. And what happens in New Zealand is we have a government body called the New Zealand Film Commission, and they provide essentially grants for films to make movies over here. So very, very, very different to, the US and, the studio system and all that sort of thing. But essentially these grants are given out to make films, and they hope that these films will sort of break out. And I had, made many submissions to the Film Commission prior to this one, but I made a submission for a new scheme around this time, as I was still making my own projects, which was what would become I Survived a Zombie Holocaust. So it was this zombie horror comedy, and it was for this new initiative called the Escalator Scheme. And the Escalator Scheme was essentially they give 250,000 New Zealand dollars to an up-and-coming filmmaker who has not made a feature film. So you couldn't have already made a feature film. And they give you that money, and through a series of steps, you are then given the money to make the film, but you have to sort of do all the pre-production first. So you have to, without anything. So you write the script, you do all the pre-production, you do the budget, you do everything, and you present that to them. Then they sort of narrow it down to another group. You go back, you redo all that stuff, and you get given the money. And so we were, it went from sort of like maybe 20 or 30 or 40 teams down to, I think, 12 teams. And so 4 of those 12 teams were going to be picked. And fortunately, we were one of those four nice. Teams that were picked to make that thing. And that was back in 2010, the end of 2010, early 2011, when that sort of initial thing happened. And there was a couple of rules around it, but one of them was that you kind of had to start production within 6 months of getting the grant, which we did, and the other thing is that you couldn't get any extra money, so you couldn't get more financing or try and get more people on board or people to kind of top that up somehow. You just had your 250,000 and that was it. And so we were given that funding, and we sort of shot in 2011, early 2011, and then it was another sort of 3 years before the film actually came out, which we can get into.
Of course.
But
you were doing post, you were doing film festivals, you were getting it out there in other ways.
That's right.
So I'd love to dive into, man. Okay, so what happened with I Survived a Zombie Holocaust with this distribution situation? Like you told me that there's a horror story here, and we'd love to share those here at the show to help and educate filmmakers. So what happened exactly?
Well, I mean, a lot of it comes down to not understanding. A lot of it comes down to ignorance on our behalf as sort of filmmakers. And then, there wasn't something, this was back 2014, 2015. This is before you'd really blown the lid off this kind of, this practice, right? And I think there's also an inherent fear from all us filmmakers. If we speak out, like if we say something about, we'll never get another opportunity, and not just from them, but from any other people that know them. And so there's this, oh, well, I can't say to anyone, this, they screwed us, because we'll just get screwed more. It will only negatively impact us. And so we all stay quiet about what happened. But for us, we sort of, there was a few issues, but, just again, we're talking about, I'm from a very small town. And although I've been to London and I've done all this stuff and I've done everything I could possibly do to educate myself about filmmaking, there's actually very few books on the post-production and finishing and business at the end. Like yours is really one of the only, and certainly one of the first. And so I didn't understand. I didn't even understand, okay, what's a good film festival? Why is there A, B, and C? I didn't understand. I got into a good film festival, I was like, great. I got into a bad film festival, I was like, great. I didn't understand the difference. I didn't understand why one might be more important to go to than the other. I didn't understand about festival fees or anything. I was just randomly submitting to random things, and if they got in, cool. All of which then sort of leads to, obviously, when you have a successful festival run, you start getting approached by sales agents and distributors. And we were approached by a sales agent. And again, there's a lot of things that sort of reel you in, because they're playing on your naivety to a high degree.
And also your dreams. Don't forget, they love
your dreams.
They love to dangle the carrot, like, hey, this could be the one. Mr. Spielberg, come this way. Yeah.
And so the first thing they did is, we haven't even finished the film yet, but we just wanted to come out of the screening and say we love it and we think it's amazing and we know we want to sign it straight away. So automatically, wow, you want to sign us? Oh,
they like me.
Exactly. This huge company, and again, we were banking on the fact that they were big. They have all this huge catalog of films. So, well, they must be good because they're big, which is, again, not necessarily at all true. And so we were definitely caught up in that, because we had multiple offers. This wasn't the only offer, but it also wasn't the only bad offer,
Right.
And so there was a lot of this sort of back and forth over it. But essentially, we sort of did all the things wrong that we normally that you have talked about. So marketing sales cap was atrociously high.
What was it?
Well, I don't think I could get into specifics, but I can definitely tell you that it was. Well, I'll just put it this way: it was over $50,000.
Okay.
And then, there was just a lot of things, but there was a lot of smaller details in that deal that just meant that it would be very unlikely, or that's not true. I suppose if it made millions of dollars, great. Of course you're going to see that money come back to you.
Maybe. Maybe. Yeah. Look, Forrest Gump, according to Paramount, Forrest Gump is still not making any money. So
exactly. And so, but even in that marketing, there was no accounting for that marketing, as in there's no way for me to go, well, can I see where you spent that money? Because they didn't spend that money. They didn't spend any of that money. They didn't spend, I would go as far as to say they spent, I'm sure, less than $1,000. But also a marketing sales cap is really, to me, more for your distributor than it is a sales agent. What does a sales agent need?
Wait a minute. This was a sales agent? You haven't even gotten to the distributor yet?
We haven't even got to the distributor yet.
Oh, my God. I'm sorry.
So you see what I'm... Yeah, exactly.
And It hurts. Okay.
But that was the problem, is we didn't even understand the distinction between the sales agent and distributor. Because now my first question would be like, why do you need $50,000? What are you doing with that? I'm providing you all these deliverables so you don't have to make anything. So you're now just giving it to a distributor who will do anything that is required. What is this marketing sales cap for? And so that was a huge thing. And then there was like other little things built in, because, it's also, okay, so we've got to recoup that $50,000, but we're also going to take our percentage from that before. So it's not $50,000. So we're taking money for ourselves while we bring back that however much money it is. So we're not just so it's not just $50,000. it's actually more like $70,000 or $80,000 because we're taking 20 or 30% or whatever it is out as we go. So then it's like, okay, so it has to make $90,000 before we see any money. And then there was just this whole, like, what I sort of heard, subsequent, because you also try and speak to filmmakers before you make these deals, but you often speak to filmmakers who have just made a deal with that sales agent. You don't speak to someone that's 3 years in, and also they may be reluctant to tell you, hey, because of this whole thing, because, thank God for, indie film hustle to say, like, hey, this is a predatory thing that's going on. It's terrible. It's got to stop, and it's happening, and we're going to shine a light on it. And I think it's just very, very important. So around that deal, around that sort of marketing cap was our big thing. But I also sort of then heard rumors later on that this wasn't even and in terms of, what they made back is always just whatever that marketing sales cap is, like almost exactly whatever that is.
Magically.
So magically. So when you look at that, you go, okay, so actually what they're doing is they're getting all these sort of lower budget, horror films, genre films, and they're doing exactly the same thing to all these different first-time filmmakers, and they're using that pot of money to actually pay for their bigger films and maybe treat those slightly, better. But so essentially they had never had any intention of making any more sales than that. All they wanted is that guaranteed first chunk of money from a big bunch of places. So, this is for, television and all that
Germany,
sort of thing.
And they're selling different territories out in different deals here and there. Yeah.
Yeah. Like big territories. They just make those sales and then they don't even push it again. It's like, it's not even part of their thing. It's just, we just needed that $50,000 that we don't have to pay back, or that, $70,000, $80,000, whatever we have to make. We get that. And we don't do anything more because it doesn't make sense for us to start really giving much back to the filmmakers. We only deal in those big deals up front with our certain people that we have, and then we sort of walk away and find the next filmmaker and do the same thing, find the next naive filmmaker and do the same thing. And so really that was, the hardest part for me is that we'd been on this journey for 5 years. I had past the $250,000 that we were given, I had actually invested heaps of my own money into, getting that finished. I'd shot pickups and I'd been living this thing for so long trying to get it made and get it done. And then just to watch kind of other people like slowly collect money and then have none of it come back. And we also had there was also lots of other things going on. So, one of the other things that they did is that they said, essentially you have to, when you give all your deliverables over, as there's sort of something in the contract that states once you've received these certain things, that's confirmed, right? It's done. You're good. You have no more obligations. Well, in the contract, one of the obligations was a letter that said we have delivered all of these things. Right. So just a letter that says you have delivered these things. We delivered those things. We sent a letter to them, not worded in that official way, just worded in a different way. And then sort of a couple of years into our thing, when we realized that essentially we'd been screwed, we had one loophole, which was if it hadn't made a certain amount by a certain time, we could ask to get it back. It was like the one good thing that we sort of put in the contract. And so I was like, cool, we need to exercise this right now. And so we go, cool, we'd like to exercise this. And they go, oh no, you haven't handed in all your deliverables. And we're like, well, what are you talking about? You've been selling the film for 2 years. You've got all the deliverables. We've confirmed it. There's been absolutely no issues. And they go, oh yeah, but if you look in the contract, you'll see that we need this confirmation letter to confirm officially that we've received those. And so that then go, so they go, cool. So then we sent that letter and they go, okay, the contract starts from now officially. And you could absolutely,
what happens to all that money that they've been making?
Well, yeah, is that null and void because we hadn't officially delivered the film? And this is the thing, and this is what I hate the most about the whole thing is, obviously you could go after them with a lawyer and say, but they know that, well, we're going to bring our lawyer, and however much it's going to cost you is not going to be worth it. And also, we know you're a poor filmmaker because we've taken all your money. So we know that you can't get a lawyer. We know that you can't afford a lawyer. And we'll just happily sit back and do our thing and, kind of keep your film in purgatory. And that's kind of what happened with that thing. But it definitely came from, I'd love to say it was absolutely a predatory situation. And it was absolutely what you talk about so often here on the podcast. But it was also, that ignorance and naivety that is exploited when you're a first-time filmmaker. And that's where we were sort of at with a lot of that, with a lot of those negotiations, is we just did not understand, how this could go wrong. And yeah.
And now you also so you mean to tell me you had a sales agent and you had a distribution company?
So the sales agent then was the issue. We do have, it did then go on to distribution.
Oh, it stopped at the sales agent.
But the sales agent was the one that did this deal. That was, and so you also have to put it into, again, that perspective of like, what is a sales agent marketing? What are they like? Yes, they're taking your film. Well, what does that involve? If you've got all your deliverables.
They're obviously buying giant billboards near highways. They're spending at least $10,000 in ads on television and Facebook. Targeting your niche audience. Obviously, they're doing all of this because the ROI makes all the sense in the world. It is terrible. I'm sorry that you had to go through that. But you learned. Look, you've been listening to me long enough. You've read a lot of my stuff. I've been through some stuff myself. With the mafia, Hollywood, and all sorts of different things that I've gone through. So, but when you come out of those kind of events, you are a lot stronger and you're a lot smarter. You've got that armor, that shrapnel that I talk about so much. You've got shrapnel all over you, brother. I could smell it. I could smell it across the world, sir. I could smell that shrapnel's there. But hopefully that story that you just told will help other people listening right now go, oh, wait a minute, I might be getting screwed on this, or damn it, I just got screwed. There has to, something has to change, man. I don't know what that is yet. I don't know how that's going to work. I trust me, there's not a day that goes by that I'm not thinking of how I can crack the nut myself. I'm like, how can I do something? How can a small podcaster, a humble podcaster, with a Yoda behind him, do something more than what I've already been doing, because something's got to change, man. Something's got to change. And it's been going around, man. It's been going around since Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin's days. I mean, it's literally been going along that long. It's crazy.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing is, I know that my story isn't new. I know that, we're sort of talking about something that happens a lot, but it's still happening. And I'm still, even my experiences, people have come to me and said, hey, what's your experience? And I've told them my experience. And then I sort of go, so what do you do? Oh, well, we signed with them. Well,
because they don't have any other options. They don't know any better. And they're like, well, this is the only guy or gal who was willing to date me. So because
exactly,
and it's an abusive relationship. So let's put it in that it's an abusive relationship, but this is the only person that loves me. So I guess I'm just going to go with them, because you don't believe that there's another option out there for you.
And I also think that we all, as filmmakers, you go, oh, well, you got screwed, guy. You know why? Because your film was just not good enough to make all that money that you thought you were going to make. That we sort of, as naive young filmmakers, we go, oh, you got screwed, but my film's going to make $1 million. The reality is that,
That's not going to happen to me. It's not going to happen to me.
That's just exactly. That's not going to happen to me because I don't. But it's like, just consider that your film isn't going to make $1 million. Consider that you just want some good returns on your film. And when do you want to start making back money from that? Do you want to start Does your film have to make $70,000-$80,000 before you see a cent? Or do you want to really think carefully about this? And also, the world is changing, right? Streaming has changed everything. Even the way that the idea of like, well, we need all this money for marketing. Well, why? Because if you put something up on, Amazon or Netflix or wherever, it's like, you don't need all that marketing. The marketing is done. The viewership is already there, Now, I'm not saying marketing isn't super important, but it's not for a sales agent or necessarily or distributor to have to spend. That comes when the film is out.
But just so you know, I've known a lot of sales reps and producers reps. I've never heard of one ever spending money for marketing. Yeah. Maybe they'll pay something to get a trailer done. Maybe they'll get a poster made if the poster's not done. But to like buy ads somewhere
doesn't make sense.
I mean, I can't even compare. I mean, the only thing that would make sense is if they bought like, a front page ad on Hollywood Reporter during AFM, or that kind of ad buy. That's a big maybe, but for a sales producer to drop $30,000 out of because it's out of their pocket, for a front, it's not like it's magic money. That's money that they're putting up and hoping to recoup. Yeah. It doesn't make business unless they think that $30,000 is going to be an easy sell. Why would they spend that money? Generally, when a sales rep picks up a film or a distributor picks up a film, if they give you an MG, which is rare nowadays, but even if they, let's say you got a deal for $50,000, that's your MG. You would have probably been like jumping out the window, like, oh my God, I got $50,000 for the MG, and that's just the start of the massive amounts of money that I'm going to make. It's just massive amounts. First of all, you'll probably never see another dime, first of all. Right. But the distributor knows that with 2 phone calls, with little effort, they'll be able to sell this film in certain territories based on their relationships or automatic output deals that a lot of them they have, that they'll make that money instantly. But what I've heard happen is, like, let's say your marketing cap is $75,000 or $100,000. Yeah. The moment they hit that $100,000, they literally stop selling it because they don't want to deal with you anymore. So like, oh, sorry. No. And they will just stop because they're like, we got our 100 out. We're done. And the filmmaker, and then they hold on to it for the next 7 years. Yes. And every single time, and then because you've signed a horrible deal. And then after that, anytime a new streaming service comes out or a new cable station in Germany opens up and they're like, we need a lot of content, they'll sell the whole library and license the whole library as a package deal. And by the time you try to do the math of how much your movie is worth or not, it's gone. It's gone. It is such a ridiculous business. The only reason that we are still able to do what we do, or the business survives, is because there's a fresh new crop of films and filmmakers coming in monthly. And these distributors and these predators know that. So they know that they don't have to build a relationship with you because there's 30 more of you right around the corner who are willing to give up. And I've actually consulted filmmakers when I was coaching them and consulting them on projects where we know we're not going to go with the distributor. And some of them are big name distributors who will remain nameless, but I know that their deals suck. And the deal that they send over suck. I'm like, okay, we're not going with them. We're going to go with these other guys, but let's push them and see how far we can go. And we'll start asking for things like, accounting on marketing, or let's drop the marketing cap, or give a little bit more MG up front, or add if you go bankrupt that the movie automatically goes back to you, as opposed to sitting in arbitration for the next 5 years and you can't do anything with the movie. And I saw it go back and forth once, and then afterwards they're like, yeah, we're done, thank you. They didn't want to negotiate anymore because they're like, this obviously is going to be a headache. The film's not worth it. There's 40 more around the corner.
And also they go, okay, this person actually knows what they're talking about. Therefore, we cannot use our regular exploitative tactics with them, and we can't make our 80, 100K up front that we want off them before we leave. So yeah, we'll just go to the next. And there's always another person, because, we don't all, not yet at least, we don't all listen to Indie Film Hustle, yet. And so, but I think the most important thing is we have to talk about it. We have to share these stories, and we have to kind of converse with other filmmakers, and really say, look, just, you need to take it to more experienced people. When you've got those deals on the table, you need to take it to more experienced people to comment on it. And even paying and we did have a lawyer and all that stuff look at this deal. Mm-hmm. And we also, crazily, we had the film commission, the body, the person there looked at this deal and was like, yeah, looks good. And that still blows my mind.
But they don't know. They don't know. They don't know any of this. You need to have I say it in the book. I'm like, don't get Uncle Bob, the real estate attorney, to look at this, because he won't know what to look for. That's why having a consulting session with me for a half an hour could save you $500,000. And it's actually happened. It's actually happened with me or with many. There's many good people out there that do what I do as far as consulting and helping filmmakers with their projects. That will. I literally had a filmmaker reach out. I think he was on the show at one point. He said, dude, you saved me $500,000 because of this deal was so bad, and I went with this other deal, and I was able to control my rights and all this kind of stuff. And it was literally a half an hour or hour consultation that I gave him, and I should charge obscenely much more than I do, but I just want to help people. And that's why I put together that course, that 6-hour distribution course on every little detail and trick that they use to screw you over. That was a new one. That paper, that letter thing, that's a completely new level of scummery.
Exactly. And I
avidly.
And I, sort of recently, or not that recently, but I sort of said, the deal's coming up. This is the official letter that would like to terminate our agreement and get the rights back at this time. And they're like, oh, thanks, but you know how you didn't send through that letter? So actually it's an extra 2 years, because of the letter, And part of me wants to totally lose my shit and go after them with everything I have. The other part of me has to be a bit more zen about it. And I just hope, like I said, that we can share these stories and we can stop people from getting into these. But you just do not want to be the kind of the low budget indie horror, which they always do sell a certain amount, and they always can make money for people. And so you don't want to be that person that's bought up by this big sales agent or distributor and used. Essentially, they suck the life out of you. Because they don't just take that film from you. They take that opportunity for the money you make from that film to develop your next film. And that's a really key thing, is that, you can't just spend 5 years on something and then get absolutely nothing to show for it and then it's like, cool, well, I'm rebuilding from square one now. I'm back to, obviously I know a lot more. I've got a lot more experience, but you've taken the opportunity for me to develop my craft and continue on. And obviously they just don't care. So that's a very good, I guess, lesson that I learned, and through this podcast and through your books has sort of made me really be much more aware of that side of it. But the key to contracts is transparency. Transparency. And all the things, if they're giving you a marketing, well, I need to know where that marketing is going, and I need it in the contract that I see everything that is being spent, and maybe that I even approve certain things, and even these marketing caps is like, really, how much are they going to be spending on your low budget indie film? If we're all making indie films, are they really dropping, $30,000 on your marketing your independent film? Like, forget about it. They're spending a tiny fraction of that and getting a lot back with these guaranteed places that they always take these to that they know they can sell. And it is borderline criminal. But
Well, it's definitely immoral, and
Yes.
the problem it is that, well, first of all, they're destroying lives. They're literally destroying people's lives. I've seen it time and time again. But what's the most disgusting part about this is that it is just so inherent inside of the distribution world that this is just the way business is done. And it's like they don't even think twice. They're like, oh, sorry, you're going to have to do another 2 years because you didn't do that one little thing. Yeah. And you're just like, wow, man. Like it just rolls off their tongue. And I've said this on the show before, and I'll say it again. The same thing that happened with Me Too, where the casting couch was business as usual. It was a running joke in the business. It was in movies that people were like, oh, if you want that part, you're going to have to go on the casting couch. Like, sleeping with the producer or the director or something. That was a thing throughout Hollywood's history. It was just business as usual till finally some people started standing up. And now, thank God, that is not the way business is done as usual. That moment is yet to happen in this space because it is still, I feel like, a financial raping of the independent film community. Yeah. Without question. It is a physical abuse that the whole distribution infrastructure is doing to independent filmmakers and the whole community in general. And again, I've said this again, it's not everybody. They're not all predators. No. They're not. I know good people. I've worked with good people. I've talked about them. I've had them on the show. There are good people out there trying to help filmmakers, but a lot of them aren't. And one thing people listening have to understand, it is harder now to make $1 with an independent film than it has ever been in the history of filmmaking. For independent filmmaking specifically, it is really, really tough. And even with people who know what they're doing, it's tough. Yeah. So walk in with that, walk in humble to this, brother. Like you were saying, like you got to walk in humble, like, oh, I'm going to be the next Spielberg. Like I had that conversation. You read it in my book. Yeah. Like in Shooting for the Mob, I was just like, it's my time. It's obviously going to happen to me. When are they going to recognize my genius? Back up the truck with the cash and in my house in the Hollywood Hills, and let's go have lunch with Spielberg and Cameron. Like how is like that was the mentality so many filmmakers have. You've got to walk in humble. Yeah. Very humble, because if you don't walk in humble, it will humble you.
Yes, as it has done many, many times.
and by the way, we'll continue to do to you throughout your career. It will humble you. Look, Jeff Katzenberg, arguably one of the more successful producers in history, with Disney and DreamWorks, and he worked with, partnered with Spielberg and Geffen to create DreamWorks, and arguably a legend. He just got humbled by Quibi. He thought he could come out. He thought he could come out. He thought he could come out, and it's like, you know what? We're going to throw 1 billion bones in this. We're going to do this, and we're going to be the next big thing, and pop, pop, pop. And you know what? It didn't work. And a lot of people lost a lot of money, and he was humbled. But I do give him credit for getting up to the plate and taking a swing. I don't think he walked in thinking that he was the end all be all. I don't know the man. I don't know how it worked, but at least he gave it a shot. But look, a man of literally a legend in our business, an absolute icon in our business, humbled. It happens to every big director. Every big director has a flop. Hey, Steven Spielberg, but he had 1941.
He did.
1941. I still love the movie, but it did not do well in the box office, and he was humbled. If you don't walk in humble to every project, promise you will get humbled at one point or another in your life. And it happens to everybody. Everybody.
And I think that's also a really important distinction to make, is that it is very hard to make a good film. It is even harder to make a good film and then have that good film, especially in the indie world, find its audience. It's not even just making a good film. You've got to make a good film, and then you have to take that one step further and connect to that audience. And that is something that costs money, and marketing and all that stuff, which is, again, we just think, hey, we'll just make this film. It'll be so good that so we don't have to worry about the good, bad thing because it's going to be so good.
It's obvious.
And two,
genius.
The audience will just connect to it. I'll find my audience. And that was another thing, is that we with Zombie Holocaust, we had, like I said, it was on Showtime for years. People were saying, "Hey, I saw your film." It was pirated, over millions of times. Sometimes it would pop up on YouTube, and then you'd catch it at about 300,000 views on YouTube, and go, "Can we please take this down?" So it's not that people weren't watching it, but even that did not truly connect. Like, I could not connect to my zombie fan base. Like, people that love zombie films still don't necessarily know that film exists. I couldn't connect to my audience. I couldn't. I didn't have that marketing push or that clout or that even that grassroots thing to really join those dots to make it a huge success in that way. And these are all things that we don't think about when we're sort of starting out. So, but you have to. And like you said, like and I think about this when I made my second feature, Older, which was a micro budget film. In 2013 is when I started that film. And in 2013, if you made a feature film, it was still an achievement. People were still like, "Hey, that's pretty. Oh, you made that. You just did that. You sort of put it all together. Oh, that's impressive." And in 2021, that's cool. It's like, cool. Well, I think my neighbor did that. He's put. I'm pretty sure he's put together a feature film.
And I think he has Eric Roberts in it. So. Sorry, Eric. Eric, I apologize. I do love you, man. Best of the Best was awesome, bro. I'm sorry.
that the technology has made it more accessible and easier to do, which has muddied the waters to the point where how you finding those quality indie titles now, because it's not just that they're not just sticking out anymore.
Right.
They're in this whole sea of other stuff. And so, that is another challenge that we have to think about and face and sort of work on if we want to connect.
No question. And if anyone listening out there thinks they're going to make an independent film and your audience is going to find you, I also have some land to sell you, or a bridge to sell you as well. Some swampland in Florida. It's fantastic. I mean, it just that's mentality from 1992, 93, 94, when someone could find a Clerks. Someone could find a Brothers McMullen. Do you think Brothers McMullen, if it showed up today, would make a dime? I talked to Ed, not to be a douchey LA guy who's dropping names, but when we had Ed on the show, I asked him, like, did you think? He's like, probably not. Probably not. It's just, it would be so difficult to get any sort of attention for a film like that in today's world. So it was about timing. And Mariachi too. When Robert eventually shows up on the show, which he will one day, when Robert shows up on the show, I'll go, do you think Mariachi would have a chance today? Like, truly, do you think, Mariachi, not that it has nothing to do with the quality of the film.
No.
It's the marketplace. Can it find its audience? So I hope people listening take your story wholeheartedly and trust me, you've got to be a special kind of person, especially depending on what age you're at, to really look at yourself and go, maybe I'm not the next Spielberg. Because I promise you, every big guy that you think, or every big director you followed in the last 30 years, all probably thought, if they were younger or another generation from Spielberg, thought were the next Spielberg. And they ended up being something else, like the Finchers of the world and the Nolans and even Cameron. Cameron was inspired by Lucas, and he went on to do his own thing. But everyone aims for the masters. Everybody wants to draw like Picasso or Van Gogh. If you pick up a paintbrush, you're like, it has to be Picasso or Van Gogh. Yeah, we'd love to get to that place, but the hard reality and the truth is you're never going to get to that. You more than likely will never get to that place because it's impossible to get to that place because there's only one Van Gogh.
Yeah.
Period. But you can get to your Van Gogh place, whatever that place might be. It could be right there next to him, or it could be just making a living as a painter and loving your life. And that's okay. You don't have to be rich and famous. You don't have to be Tarantino to be a successful filmmaker. I know filmmakers have had on the show who direct all the time and just make their movies and aim it at their audiences, and they make a good living, and they're not living up in the Hollywood Hills, but every day they wake up and they get to do what they love to do. And I think that is the success. That is the dream. Not making millions of dollars and making a Marvel movie, which, by the way, as I always say, Kevin Feige, I'll take the meeting. but that's not the only definition of success. And I think hopefully in this show, I've put that out there enough that filmmakers, especially younger filmmakers, will understand that. And I'm glad you've shared this story with us. But before we go, I do want to touch upon the 7 years it took you to make your next film, Older. What happened?
Yeah, so after the experience with the zombie film, and to be honest, I was still going through it because in 2013 I was still wrapping up the post-production on the zombie film, and I was still sort of chipping away at that. But I sort of was like, okay, cool. I've made this kind of, and again, one of my other mistakes is that I tried to make a film that should have cost several $1 million for $250,000. So I was not working within my budget in terms of so that made every single scene, every single thing harder because essentially I was asking much more of the resources that I had. So I had to be, much cleverer about my approach, which I wasn't always, but all of that just made it extremely difficult. And I thought, okay, look, I just want to do a walkie-talkie film. I want to do a film, that's much more modest in scope and scale, that is, something that I love, which is, who you've had on the show, Richard Linklater films. But I was thinking about Before Sunset, Sunrise, just people talking and hanging out, real relationships, all that sort of stuff. I loved, those early Woody Allen films as well that sort of dealt with that sort of thing. And so I wanted to do something like that, which was just as far away from zombies and exploding heads and sort of gore and all those sort of things that I'd been sort of, knee deep in. I wanted to just do the opposite. And that was really my inspiration for shooting Older, just do a real relationship drama because I love those films as well. I'm not just a horror guy. And so I sort of set about, we did some crowdfunding, and this was kind of before crowdfunding was cool. This is when it was sort of in its infancy, like not everyone was doing it. We did it Indiegogo and we raised, I think about $5,000. I also have, with my production partner, Harley Neville, we have this successful YouTube channel. We used some money from our YouTube channel, and we kind of pooled all those resources, and we were just like, it's going to be 3 weeks. I'm going to shoot it. I'm going to have it all done within a year. Just within a year. It's
sure.
going to be all done.
I'm sure that's the way it worked out.
And we shot it. We shot it in 3 weeks, but with the idea that we'd shoot like 80% of it. So that 80% was like the hardest part of the film. We'd do in 3 weeks, and then we'd pick up some of the little bits that I didn't have time for, that 20% over weekends following on from that. And that was always the way I'd do it. And I was sort of inspired because, at that time, 2013, the 5D Mark III had come out, and the Mark II, and I'd shot some pickups for the zombie film on the Mark II, and I was like, holy cow, this camera can almost replicate what I had with a crew of 20 or 30 on the zombie film, but it's just me and another guy and some photography lenses. And so, obviously it was this kind of revolutionary moment for indie filmmakers at the time, with that type of gear to get this shallow depth of field look is really what we're talking about. And so I was like, okay, we'll get that camera. We'll use that. I had a friend over in Australia who's a director of photography. He actually flew over for 3 weeks to shoot, to do that shoot. And we sort of really went back to basics with it. Super small crew, way more we're talking 3 or 4 people, and keeping it that small scale because it gives you a lot of freedom. It gives you a lot more freedom sometimes when we're not all thinking about our marks and the focus puller is a bit out today. All of those things that kind of sometimes stagnate a shoot when you have a big team and a big crew. You can just go back to the basics and it's all about the story, it's all about the performances, and it's about character and relationships and all that sort of thing. So we shot that. We continued to do those pickups straight afterwards. But what happened is that I kind of then got bogged back down in creating the deliverables and post work for the zombie film, and then the promotion and marketing of the zombie film. So from that sort of end of 2013 into 2014 into 2015, I was really very preoccupied with getting my first feature out there, and sort of didn't really start back up editing Older until sort of, 2016-ish, really. And then I sort of had some more ideas about maybe I want to change this, maybe I want to adjust some things, because I'm a perfectionist, and you have a love for Stanley Kubrick, I have a love for Stanley Kubrick.
Mm-hmm.
It's not right until it's right. And so when you have such a small crew and such a small team, and you're on good terms with all of them, one of the big benefits you have is you can go, you know what, the scene isn't quite right, let's go back and redo it, let's shoot it again. So I sort of did a little bit of that. I did a little bit of rewriting of some sections, which again could have been avoided had I done more thorough work on the script to begin with. I was sort of rewriting after the fact instead of rewriting beforehand and saving all that time to shoot it twice. So I wouldn't say that, like, essentially the majority of the film was still that 2013 shoot, but there was these bits from 2014 and 2015 and 2016 and actually all the way up to 2019.
How did you were the star of this as well, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
How did you keep your you're aging. I'm
aging rapidly.
I'm aging rapidly. As filmmakers too, we do not age well.
I always joke about this too, is that filmmaking is like staring into the deadlights in it, when it turns everything grey. That's filmmaking. It ages you years and years.
I'm 25 years old. I'm 25 years old. Look at me. You're like what, 17? I mean, look at you.
Exactly. I'm only 17. So it was a bit of a problem. I went from having hair that was graying to grey hair, so I had to keep dyeing my hair for it. I also had to maintain a certain weight as well, because I'd sort of got in shape, because I knew I was doing these sex scenes and stuff like that, and I was like, okay, I want to look good on camera, obviously. And so that was a struggle. So it was a battle, Alex. It was very tricky.
At least it kept you healthy. It kept you healthy.
Healthy.
You look better than you ever did for 7 years. And now you've completely let yourself go. So that's fine.
That's right. And now I'm totally different. And I'm like, look, now that time can catch back up. So it was a little bit of a challenge to keep that continuity. And we had actresses, with hair twice the length it was, and they were like, well, I'm not cutting it again for this film, guys. So you better figure out a way to dress my hair so it doesn't look like this. And so there was lots of issues like that. There was also some of that, like the house that we'd originally filmed in, we no longer lived there, so we couldn't film there anymore. So we had to go back in, and there was all sorts of stuff.
So all of this is the insanity of
That's
being
right.
This is the definition of insanity of being a filmmaker. It is, and it's wonderful, it's beautiful, and it's just destructive and terrifying all at the same time. It can be. It wasn't in this case, but it can be.
Yes.
Imagine if you would have put not 8,000 but 80,000, and you would have mortgaged your house, and then all of a sudden you can't pay the rent, and all of a sudden you lose your house because of this film. And I've heard these stories, man. So, but at least you were smart enough to go, let's keep this micro.
Keep it small.
Keep it small. Keep it small. The worst thing is I can't eat those French fries. That gotta look good.
And the other battle too was just the edit, because I also edited it myself, and I got busy with other projects. If someone would come on and say, hey, can you shoot this web series? It's like, okay, cool. Well, that's, the next 4 months is me working on that web series, we're gonna shoot this other little short film. Okay, well, let me do that. And so I certainly got into having to put a pause on the film to do these other projects, which I was very grateful for, because sort of earlier, maybe in 2013, I wasn't being asked to do those things. So it was a progression in one respect, but it was also holding up the film. But I think that that's again something that if I had a do-over and I could afford it, I wouldn't edit it myself, because
it's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. In fact, to me, that is the most time-intensive part of the filmmaking. You think it's the shoot. Maybe you think it's the writing of it. You think all those things, but as soon as you're in that edit room and you're chipping away and you're looking at take 6 and you're like, I actually need a little bit from here and a little bit from take 1, a little bit from take 2.
Brutal.
It's a grind. And so all of those things, because also, I also work other jobs as well. I'm not just a full-time filmmaker. Sadly, people aren't paying me enough to, just be directing or freelancing. I do I do camera stuff and edits for other people and write for other people. So all of those things kind of just would put a pause on the film until we sort of finally got to the end in sort of 2020. And sometimes you also, like, I'd been through it once. I'd been through that whole process. So I was a little bit more patient and understanding of that process. And really the focus was obviously trying to make the film as good as it could be. But that 7 years goes by pretty quick.
I tell you, like, I just woke up and I'm 46 now. Like, last night I just got into film school. Like, I mean, it was just like,
Exactly.
I still remember, like, just walking onto the soundstage for the first time going, oh, this is where I'm going to bring in the crane here, and we're going to get the techno over here, and we're going to do this. And none of that I could afford. But Richard Linklater said something that was such a profound statement. And I've heard a few people tweet it out after that interview came out. He says that our skill set eventually catches up with our ideas. Because when you're young and when you're starting out, you've got massive ideas. You're like, I can do Avengers. Yeah, I could do this or that. But the skill set, the craft takes time to catch up. And he was the first to admit it. Like when he did Slacker, there was things in every movie that he kept doing, from Dazed and Confused and so on. He got better and better and better. And I even, told him that. And he's like, yeah, after the fourth or fifth, I'm solid. Like after the fourth or fifth movie, I was like, you might not like my movies, but you can't argue that I can make movies. That I can finish a movie. So like, it took me about 4 or 5 movies to get that under my belt, and I'm solid. You can't argue with that. At the beginning, you could, like, is this guy even going to be able to make this thing work? It takes time to get that craft, to catch up to those ideas. And it's patience, brother. It's patience. But listen, I have a couple questions to ask all my guests, and you probably know these since you listen to the show.
I am.
You should. Then you better be prepared, sir. What advice would you give a filmmaker trying to break into the business today?
Well, to be honest, because we've mentioned a couple of these, and I actually did try and write down a couple of these things. But for starters, forget the lottery ticket mentality, as you say all the time, and think about long-term sustainability. View your films as a brand and business as well as an artistic endeavor. So that's something that that I would definitely throw out there. I would also say, don't assume that people will recognize your talent. So focus on connecting with an audience that appreciates it, but stop assuming that I'm a genius. And what I do will just be at that level that I want it to be with all my, all those greats that I look up to. So, you got to shift that mindset a lot. So those are the things I'd take away. I mean, to my younger self, I'd say, look, man, don't be depressed. But it is going to take a lot longer than you think. Obviously,
it's going to take and again, I'll go back to Rick, because he said this another quote. He's like, it's going to take twice as long as you think, and it's going to be twice as hard.
Yes, and that is
so great. So great.
And I know that I can't remember who it was that said it takes 10 years to become an overnight success. Well, maybe I think it takes 20 years to become an overnight success.
It depends on your path, man. Look, it all depends on the path you walk. Some people hit it out of the park, like Robert.
That's true.
With El Mariachi, and he was given a gift. And a lot of these guys I've had on the show were given gifts. Like, they happen to be at the right place, right time, right product. And you know what? Everyone has their path. So you just got to walk your path the best way you can. And maybe you're destined for greatness, or great things in the way that you think they're great, or maybe you're destined to make a beautiful living doing the art form that you love, and maybe no one will recognize you other than that small audience that loves you, and that is an amazing accomplishment. Or maybe this business isn't for you, and that's a sad reality of what we do, because we were talking in the beginning, that punch comes. Either you know how to take it and keep going forward, or you're knocked out. And I've seen a lot of filmmakers get knocked out. And the only goal I have with the show is to make sure that you know that punch is coming. To let you know that's coming. Because I wish I had that podcast when you were trying to get this distribution deal.
That's me too. I wish I was listening to this. I was like,
I wasn't even.
Why hadn't you started yet?
I hadn't even started yet. So I was in my own turmoil selling olive oil and vinegar, and that's a whole other conversation for another day. But yeah, okay. Now, what is the lesson that took you the longest to learn, whether in film business or in life?
I think it goes back to you're not entitled to success. You are not. That is not entitlement. How good you think you are, or how talented you are not entitled to success, and you're not entitled to appreciation, no matter how good you think you are. I think that was a big lesson for me to learn as a younger filmmaker, and even that I'm still have to remind myself of from time to time. When I get into these conversations with filmmakers or producers, and I'm like, man, I made 2 films, mother effer. Like, I know what I'm doing, but you can't look at it like that. You have to come into it humble. And so that was a big thing for me is there are no entitlements here, and you don't deserve any of that. You've got to, even if you're the hardest worker because I also thought it was to do with hard work. I thought if you're the hardest worker in the room and you've got some talent, it will come together. I actually don't think that's true. Like, you can do all those things and it's still not come together every time,
What I would say as far as that is concerned, I think if you're the hardest worker in the room and you have a little bit of talent, something will eventually happen.
Yes.
It could happen in a year. It could happen in 10 years. But only good things come from that in one way, shape, or form if you stick with it. That has been my experience. That's been my experience talking to so many filmmakers. If you show up and just keep working every day, something will happen. And I use the example of the podcast. When I launched, nobody knew who I was. No one knew Indie Film Hustle. I came out of it literally from scratch, and I just showed up every day and just did as much work as humanly possible. And I've been able to build up to what I've been able to build up over the last 6 years, but purely because of just straight up hustle, man. Straight up just grinding harder than anybody else. And good things do eventually happen, but it takes time to do it. But it might not happen to the way you imagine it in your head. And that is the lesson. Because you're not going, if you say, oh, I'm going to win the Oscar, you're done. You're done. Pack it up. You're not going to win the Oscar. It's not going to happen. Like, oh, I'm going to make $1 million. Maybe. I don't know. Doubtful. Depends on the movie. Maybe not. Who knows? But just if you can get out of what your vision of your success is and just let it unfold in front of you and be open to whatever comes to you, that I think is a much more a better recipe for success than trying to plan this opus, this grand thing. Because I promise you, and I've spoken to these guys on the show, every one of them that had these grand things happen to them, not one of them planned it.
And it's such an important distinction, isn't it? Because we're coming in, seeing these people and expecting the same type of success, the Robert Rodriguez, the Kevin Smith. We're going to go that journey. We're going to make these, and and it's like, but they didn't have that plan. They're like, I'm just going to make my thing. I got to tell my story and hope that something comes from it. And then all of this stuff came from it. But, I think that's, again, goes back to that sort of entitlement thing, right? And what we are adjusting our expectations. Because I am sort of very proud of the things that I've done in my career. Yeah. I'm very proud of having made 2 feature films, and I'm super excited to be, just about finishing another one, and all the opportunities that have come with that, all the people I've got to work with along the way. I am incredibly grateful and thankful for that. But it was not, it's not the giddy heights of Hollywood, and that's okay. As you said, that's okay.
I mean, Robert wanted to make a mariachi for the Spanish VHS market. He had no intention of ever it being anywhere else other than straight to video to the Spanish market, not even straight to video American market, straight to video. And look what happened to him. None of them expected. Do you think Spielberg expected Jaws to be the beginning of the blockbuster, to be the biggest movie of all time No, none of them do. So I hope that gets in there. And last question, sir. 3 of your favorite films of all time.
I mean, this is the hardest one.
But you've had time. Yeah, I'm sure they're written time. They're written down. So let's go.
I've written down and I've cheated. So I'm gonna throw out. So my first top 3 is the 3 that I can just off the top of my head. The Shining, number 1.
Obviously.
Original Star Wars trilogy, and Back to the Future. I know that's a cheat, but that would be solid. That would be my another 3. The Thing, John Carpenter. the original Indiana Jones trilogy, and the Dollars trilogy. So
you've cheated all sorts in that. I'm
gonna cheat one more time. One more set of cheats, because this is a little bit off the beaten path, because I know that people always give those ones. The Big Lebowski,
sure,
The Labyrinth, and Before Sunset. The Labyrinth. I know you haven't had
The Labyrinth. I don't think Labyrinth has been on the show. Before Sunset, I don't think has either made the list either. But to be fair, you have cheated. So I'm gonna have to disqualify these, sir. I'm sorry. Yeah. But Guy, man, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you, man. Thank you so much for being so raw and honest and transparent with your experience, and putting it out there for the world to hear and hopefully help other filmmakers out there. It takes a brave filmmaker to come out and just kind of like, hey man, look, I learned these lessons. Hopefully it's going to help some other people. But I do truly appreciate you coming on the show, and it's been a blast talking to you, my friend. So thank you so much, and much success on your journey, sir.
Well, thank you, Alex. Thank you for having me on. I am a cautionary tale for other filmmakers, but I hope that one that people can take a lot and learn from and go, cool, I'm not going to make those mistakes, because we all make mistakes and we keep making mistakes. What do we take and learn from those? So I really hope people learn from my mistakes. And I'd also just like to say, please go and see my new film, which is available now, Amazon Prime, Tubi, Google Play, which is older. It's free on most of those platforms, and we've been getting some awesome feedback, and we want to keep making films, and long may it continue. So please check that out, and you can also find me on YouTube, The Savage Filmmaker.
Fantastic, man. Thank you again, brother.